and we work in Untrite on innovative solutions around AI. We believe the transformational power of technology can help lots of businesses to reduce costs and help them to smooth their processes. And we want to help as many people as possible. So we've gathered today some experts which with the right mindsets. So we hope to educate and explain common misconceptions around the subject of AI. I would like to welcome you to this first the AI Journey workshop series. It's our first one, so apologies for some glitches. In today's agenda, we hope to help you understand why you should get excited about AI. We will try to also help you to assessing if your business is AI ready. And we will share some of the most exciting for us use cases around using AI. And finally, we will give you a good overview of the AI adoption process. In today's audience, we have quite a few right now already. Executives from financial services, healthcare, construction, and business management industries. And the ultimate goal of this 2 hours workshop is for you to leave with the aha moment, so you can start your AI journey. This is going to be, or this is meant to be, a very interactive panel. So we hope for your questions. Find some tough ones. And we don't want this to be another YouTube webinar with some boring slides. So hopefully Pete will make it quite cool. All of the participants are on mute by default and hidden, so don't worry, you can do some crazy moves. It's about participation, as I said before. So we will, after a short introduction about on the what the AI is, we will have a discussion with you. So please feel free to leave questions or raise your hand if you see any option like that, and I will try to unmute you if you want to speak up. So today's discussion will be led by Pete Moore, who is our head of project delivery, and thanks, Pete, and Kuba Miszorny, who is our CTO. In the audience, we also have Tomasz Bilakiewicz, whom we work with on the financial services related projects, and whom I've recently co-authored the white paper, but you will hear about it later. And we have Mohammed Abukbar, who is our specialist in construction and real estate industry. So Pete, a question to you. So why AI is such a powerful tool?
Cool. All right. A quick intro about myself. I'm Pete Moore. My background has been focused on delivering transformation, both in SMEs and global corporate, and primarily using technologies to automate repeatable process and find those smarter ways to locate, interrogate, and use data to drive down things like errors, uplift throughput, and so on. I'm excited about using AI and how we can take the company through that journey of kind of discovery. I'm going to start just when you said you're not going to do any slides. Thanks, Camilla, because I've got a couple. But actually, this is just to set the scene before I answer the question. So let me just share my screen real quick. And what I wanted to kind of talk about is what do people think about when we talk about AI, and what do we imagine it might become? First of all, there we go.
Pete, sorry for interrupting you. I think your colleague Mark Johnson raised hand, so I don't know how to unraise it. I don't know what to do with it. Sorry.
Oh, unmute him and find out what does he want.
And hi guys, can you hear on mod? Yes, we can now.
Yes.
I have to say it was trying to show you where the raise your hand function was earlier in the conversation, so don't worry about it. Please carry
Okay,
on,
cool.
Pete.
Carry
Thanks,
on.
Mark.
Thank you. So you always bring disruptors in. So sorry, what was I saying? Of course. So what do we think about when we talk about AI? You know, we all have these sorts of devices in our homes, and we get them to do things, you know, shopping lists and playlists and so on. We've all heard about the vacuum cleaner. It uses AI to determine its location in its given footprint. It interacts with its environment, turns around at the walls and so on. I've yet to see one that gets up the stairs though, so some improvements to be done there. That leads on nicely to the lawnmower. It does the same thing, but it cuts grass. Doesn't avoid dog mess though, or at least I've not found one that does. Tesla and auto drive. This has been widely publicized in the press as this new cool, great driverless feature. And you know, we'll ask it to take me there, you know, maybe if it doesn't crash. Then we move on to things that are a bit more kind of emotional. You know, iRobot, lots of us have seen iRobot in films such as, and Sonny is this emotional, responsive droid, this human-esque thing. Unfortunately for us right now, that's still very much fiction today. And then, of course, the ultimate, you know, Skynet is going to take over the world. We're all going to become victims of our own AI success and meet the Terminator. This is for fiction for the foreseeable future, but you know, there are people who are working on these kinds of capabilities. So, what then is AI? Having just seen some of those very extreme cases. But to me, I think it's all of those things to a greater or lesser extent, really. With the Siri and those kinds of things, we interact with them, use them every day. Search engines, those kinds of things. The intelligent driver aids, as we've just briefly talked about. And then, you know, the iRobot, the future of possibility with emotional AI response. There is billions of dollars a year globally pumped into hundreds of companies, thousands probably, that are working in these groundbreaking areas. And then, of course, the military applications that we've all seen on TV, the automated drones, and you know, we already know around the place that they're working on things like mechanized soldiers, for good or for bad. Minsky said this back in 1968. That's how long AI has been around, folks. Artificial intelligence is the science of making machines do things that would require intelligence if done by men. Of course, modern day, we need to put people there because we're all very sensitive to how we call each other out. But what does all that mean for the business? How can we translate that into the business? Because what we've just seen is that AI can mean lots of different things to lots of people, and we can get lost in this romantic notion of emotional AI. And honestly, through some of my experience, this allows the business to kind of hide away from this AI journey. Of course, it doesn't have to be that way, but generally the business is like that ocean liner, the very cliche. You need tons of time and lots of specific time-ordered tasks to get it to do anything. So Camilla, your question to me was, why is AI such a powerful tool? If we could imagine that we could handbrake turn the ship, AI would be the largest change to efficiency any company could make. I've yet to hear an example of any company where AI could not drive efficiency or improve client service and delivery, you know, and ultimately therefore lead to an increase in the bottom line. You know, Kuba, what do you think?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
That's exactly right, Pete. And you know, I always want to bring this a little bit, you know, more down to earth from the sky that you started at. So like, how do we execute this handbrake turn? The way I think about the AI journey in an enterprise and the way we present it to our clients is this template that you see right now on the slides. You know, and this is just that, a template. Each deployment is different. It has different requirements. We take some stuff out or we put new in. Right, yeah. So, and often necessary but a boring step is this step of robotic process automation. So the two steps on the left here. So you need to examine the workflows that you want to optimize and precisely define them. if we don't know the outcomes that we're looking for, the whole process will not work. So by laying those foundations of the robotic process automation, we are preparing for the future intelligence. So in this context, RPA means a system that automates precise human tasks following simple rules. Those rules have to be very, very well defined and coded into those systems. You remember, computers are dumb. They do exactly what we tell them to. So if we don't program something in, it will not happen. So, and exactly that, and exactly this happens all the time in RPA. If you don't have a rule for something, this something will be an edge case, will be an exception. And those exceptions are always put onto some queue for processing by human operators. So the value out of the RPA system is the improved processing time and less backlog for the things that you've defined, but it's also the cost of context switching and processing that edge case queue. So the next step in the journey, the obvious step, is kind of figuring out how to deal with those edge cases. And the answer here is machine learning. One approach here is to take all of the decisions that the expert made in the edge case queue and feed them to the machine learning models and let it figure out by itself what it should do in the future. The key point here is that we are making a system that will be able to handle situations it never saw before. So it learns from the actions of the experts of the past, and will apply them to the future. And what's even more important, the system should be able to continually learn if there's new human expert interventions. It will learn those, and in the future also deal with those cases. And a lot of those processes that we deal with the inputs to them are in text format, right? So all sorts of documents, there is text everywhere in a modern enterprise. And working with textual documents is very difficult for computers. They don't understand anything. For them, it's just a bunch of characters. To deal with that, we use something called natural language processing. Those systems help computers understand the meaning and the context of the content in the documents. So at this point, we combine the power of understanding human language with NLP, the analytical abilities across structured data, and the decision modeling through machine learning. It's systems that use those three things appear to magically know what the users need, and serve exactly that at exactly the right time. So this is a very rosy picture of what's possible, but obviously there is obstacles on the way of getting there. And I think it's very important to talk about them so we can be prepared to how to overcome them. So can you tell us, Pete, about those roadblocks that we might encounter on our way?
Sure. I think my experience tells me that the single largest kind of barrier to entry of AI is access to data. And a lot of those are they're not all technical barriers, some are organizational too, but from a technical point of view, I wonder how many businesses these days know what data they've got. Do they know where it is? Do they know what format it is? And if you think back to when I was younger, then the whole business was run in Excel because that's the kind of tools that we had. And what I find even today, and unsurprisingly, is because Excel has kind of grown with its capabilities, so people have continued to use it for kind of more and more things. And every business I've either worked for or in, it's surprising how much Excel is still out there. And so, where is this data kept? We now know it's in Excel. We know it's in email. We know it's in a database somewhere. It might be under somebody's desk. It might be in a Rolodex. It might be in documents. It's literally all over the place and in all different formats. And even any company, startups are usually good examples because they do know where the data is and what they've got. Do you have permission to use it? Is it your data? Is it client's data? Are there privacy or security problems with using it? Then if you've got to the point where you know where it is and you know what format it's in, and you've got permission, your next barrier is, do you have reliable access to it? Is it APIs? Is it flat files? Can you actually get it in a consistent way? And from an organizational point of view, I find that lots of companies understand that there are ways to monetize data or make it smarter, cooler, and faster. And the sways of this stuff around in various systems. And often, people can list 20, 30, 40, 50 systems where data is held and mastered. But data ownership inside the organization then becomes a problem in itself. Is it global data? Is it divisional data, departmental data? And if you're in a brokerage company, it's individual data. And, Kuba, one of the things you and I talk about often is that, and in fact, we do this to each other. Nobody wants to give up data, yet we want access to everybody else's, right?
Yeah, that's right. And as you know, I always try to kind of focus on one person and get their data and then expand like that. And I think that's the way to go around this data problem. Define a very small self-contained projects. Even with established products that we have, we can just connect them to one system that deals with one format of data. And through that, we can build proofs of value that then that person can bring to others in the company and show them how beneficial those systems are. And it's so much easier to grow from that footstep instead of defining a multi-million-dollar project throughout months that then flops at the end because there was like one small obstacle that we couldn't overcome. So I actually have this use case I'm particularly excited about that I think illustrates a lot of those points. This project it was centered around improving an accounting workflow that was dealing with processing incoming invoices and then feeding them into an upstream ERP system. So this invoice came from emails, traditional physical mail in various formats. Name a possible document format, and it was probably somewhere there. And initially, when we started the conversation, the company was at the RPA step. They were processing those documents with some rules in an RPA system, and around half of them produced exceptions. They were put on that exception queue. And what was going on was that a lot of those documents in the funnel they were using to funnel them into the RPA system were actually not invoices. They were as well purchase orders, contracts, and even COVID leaflets. And so this exception queue had to be processed by some employees. And so the proof of value that we defined was this small self-contained deployment that had access to only one stream of documents from one jurisdiction that connected to one ERP class upstream. And so the value add went beyond the obvious and expected time optimization and cost reduction. It helped reduce error rates, which meant saving on the late payment fees. In the RPA system before, the invoices that end up on the queue could have waited there for weeks, and the due date of the invoice expired, and the company had to pay late payment fees. But the one thing that I was even more excited in this use case was something really unexpected. It was that the implementation of this system helped with increasing privacy and reducing security concerns. So in the original process, the edge case queue was manned, obviously, by the lowest paid junior employees. After all, it was just looking at a PDF and taking one date out of it. So just extracting some data from documents. But you don't really want those unvetted junior employees looking at the sensitive contracts. And machine learning solves this because the computers and those machine learning systems and the computers are verifiable, trustworthy, and what's more important, auditable. So you can see exactly what happens to the document throughout its life, and that the documents don't leak through the verified systems. So now all the documents they never really need the human eyes. It's just real exceptions, and those exceptions can be dealt with, senior employees, and therefore more secure. And we see this all the time in the AI adoption. I always talk about this as the whole thing is there's more value in it than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, I mean, so do you know the interesting thing is, from anybody that's on the call that was listening before the call started, that segues nicely into what we were talking about before it started, because what is seemingly an unrelated use case that actually highlights that privacy and security aspect of AI is medical coding. So we know this is the process of converting kind of the doctor's treatment notes into that structured format of medical codes, and those are then they go on to be used for things like billing, whether it's healthcare or insurers or whatever. That's how it works here in the US and the UK, anyways. And we know that process is often done by, as you mentioned previously, in those kind of sort of junior employees that specialize specifically in that kind of field of medical coding. But what I found from the articles I was reading, as I said at the beginning, from what I've been reading, what's interesting and frankly quite worrying is if you look at the US, most of their medical coding is actually outsourced. Much of that abroad, where it's it's labor arbitrage, and it's just much cheaper. So where the lowest bid kind of wins that race to privacy, when privacy is supposed to be one of the top priorities for people, right? So I think that's something you can do, as you were saying before, about changing the game with AI. That medical coding system can be trained on those millions of previous kind of coded documents that we have from history, and deliver that kind of complete privacy solution, almost as a side effect of looking actually at kind of efficiency and throughput and kind of and decreased cost. You're on mute.
I keep being muted. And this is the way we work. We have backend modules and natural language models that we can mix and match to solve a lot of those problems. And the backend module that was working on those invoice data extraction. This is the same module that is at the core of the medical coding system. It just trained on different vocabulary and different data set. So I think this sets the scene enough, and we're gonna move to the
we can just
panel.
I can talk to you for 2 hours on my own. It's fine.
Okay, yeah, you guys, you're right. Like, we should start with the panel. So we have some questions, but maybe we can give some spotlight to Tom, because Tom has a lot of great knowledge around using AI around due diligence, as something which you kind of touched upon, but yeah, that would be amazing to hear what you think on like the advantages of using AI around this area.
It's very interesting, Camila. I think first of all, I see both points, advantages and potential risks. Let me actually start with the latest, or the latter one. There will be few cases that we should probably keep in mind, and it goes more down the line of so the spy net and so on, and how the AI is actually going to take over the world. And it just always makes me think about one of the deals we were working on, where we were told to switch off our phones and switch off tracking in our phones, because we were making journeys from the bank to the customer's offices, or the sort of target acquisition offices. And we realized that if anyone ever got hold of this data, you could technically figure out that the bank X is trying to do this big acquisition. So that was a little bit freaky. However, if we flip this on its head, you see this amazing sea of opportunities of where it actually can be applied. And as you say, due diligence in financial services, or genuinely in financial services, is extremely exciting. As you guys already mentioned, I think there are different potential applications of AI and different ways where it can be used. It's AI's capability to kind of do everything that, or do most of the things that a person can do, which obviously immediately you have some potential for efficiencies. Some potential roles can be changed, like quality assurance and so on. But then there is this big element around privacy, right? The things that always terrifies me, and I think Kuba kind of described it very, very well with Pete, is where some of the most sensitive information has to be processed by someone, sort of either typing it or copying it from one source to another. And that means that it's prone to sort of being leaked somewhere. And if you can take away that element and actually anonymize it, and make sure that when it gets from point A to point B, it's sort of handled securely, that in its own right is mind-blowing. Then you have the ability of AI to handle a lot of data at the same time. And again, the way we apply it, can be so many ways. We can do summaries of documents. I don't know if anyone of you ever tried to read through a full sort of Q1, Q2 subscriptions from any of the big financial institutions. It's hundreds of pages of not that exciting documents. Let's be honest. I know there are people who get excited by them, and I'm probably guilty of being one of them. But objectively, if you can, you would rather avoid having to go through them. With some of the capabilities Untrite has or other sort of solution can provide in this space, to be able to ask a question, very specific question, is this company doing better this year than last year? And I have AI actually scan through the documents and pull out the bit that you're interested in and just a quick answer, yes, no. That is mind-blowing. That is absolutely mind-blowing. Then there is the element, I think, of AI being able to process information in real time on top of that. So the challenge with sort of us as humans, we have to actively search for things in order to find them, right? But we can't just pick up changes. And there was this really big case in Russia a few years ago where a client received a loan contract from the bank, and then he was very cheeky and actually changed the wording on the contract. He retyped it. He made it look like the original contract, but actually changed some of the clauses, signed it, and sent it back to the bank. And no one realized that the contract had been changed. So then when they tried to execute on that debt, he went, well, actually, check your contracts. I think it's you who owes me money instead of the other way around, because the interest rate there is negative. And it's sort of obvious that a person isn't able to check this, right? Because we don't have this magic spotlight that just goes, oh, this is one element that differs, while AI could be able to do this, again, as Kuba described. And then finally, I think there is just element of connecting different data points and kind of holding them in short-term memory at the same time. So, and I think this is sort of what we wrote a lot about in the due diligence paper with Camila. It's this ability to take an information from here, from here, from here, from there, and actually say this bit and that bit, they don't add up and they kind of differ. And therefore you have to query, right? It's kind of impossible for a person to remember that 2 months ago they read something different in a document. So we could go on forever. Again, sorry for this. It's just a huge topic, and I think we're going back really to what Pete said with this Minsky quote. I would think about every activity that a human is doing, and technically that could be replaced and could be done either faster or better in most cases.
Thanks so much, Tom. And what do you think, Pete and Abu? Maybe you can give us some like interesting cases on the real estate area, since we are touching on those.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about the Can you hear me? I think I muted myself.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I have a lot of thoughts about that, particularly in the construction industry, where most of my experience is. And construction industry, as a lot of other industries, is very heavily reliant on data, and a lot of data, a lot of documents from the very beginning of thinking about a project and whether this project as an asset is a property or it's a metro station or whatever it is, from it being an idea in the head of a client and they wanting to investigate the options, to the procurement process, to the actual construction and building it. It's very heavily reliant on a lot of documents, loads and loads of documents, and to manage this process from the very beginning of design through execution and construction, understanding how it's being built, managing all these risks and the different parties involved, whether they are the supply chain, the contractors building it, or the operator or the clients paying for it. And in a lot of cases, they have all the same objective to building it, but they have their commercial positions and they want to protect it, as well as they want to make sure that they're building what they actually want to, at the end of it, achieve the end goal. And there is loads of room for information where it's very repetitive, the information that you're trying to get, whether it's, let's say, for example, a contract with a lot of clauses to manage the build of an asset. The process for managing that, whether it takes a year or 2 years or 3 years, it's the same every period. You're looking for a lot of information. You're trying to gather these information to make sure that you're presenting it properly and correctly. And the repetitiveness of this, it takes a lot of time, a lot of resources, whether it's the contract manager trying to go through all these information or the finance team, etc. And it could make a huge change to the construction industry, particularly that construction also is notorious for being known as behind the curve when it comes to adopting technology. It's like the dinosaurs of all these technologies, because they're so slow in adopting these. They're doing things in particular ways. So change is very, there is a lot of resistance to that change, whether from the supply chain or from the organization that actually the real estate or the properties or the end users who are actually paying for it. And my experience has always been the influence coming mostly from, or the push from where the money comes from, the end user. If they push for that change, the supply chain would listen to and continue with trying to adopt all these technologies. There is a lot of ideas. There's lots of different companies trying to, especially the big companies who have the capacity for investment. They are they're seeing the benefits and they're willing to put a lot into this investment. The construction industry in the UK is asking for more for less. It's always, there's a pressure on spending less but getting more, but at the same time increasing all the requirements for safety. When you're building something, when you walk around the streets in London, you see scaffolds all over the place and traffic management, and there's a way of life. There is always going to be construction. You need to make sure that, and before you do anything, any construction work anywhere, you have to make sure that it's gone through all the safety procedures, the risk has been assessed, and all of that stuff, all the reviews of all of these information, all of these documents, it's exactly the same. It looks for the same information in every single document that's being submitted every single time, whether you're dealing with a utility company, whether it's being Thames Water or it's being the gas company, whatever it is, they have their information, they've got the data, and you have a field engineer or a resource or whoever it is, he needs to go through all of this every single time exactly the same way. So I think
I agree, and I think so some of the things in commercial real estate, sort of generally, as you know, from construction to get your building, you know, you operate it, you control it, you FM it, and all those great things. I think that similar use case you're describing there through kind of review and control of documentation is another great example, because if I look at FM, which is, you know, you're just saying you've got your guy going out doing some work. So you've got someone fixing a lift and somebody changing the light bulbs and somebody doing a survey, and they're all filling in documents and paperwork and all the rest of it. And some of it is kind of legal. So there is there's a legal requirement to do certain types of activity, right? And so that those legislative and regulatory compliance issues, you have to report on those. You have to report to the client, you have to report to your own company, you have to report upstream to the health executive and all those different places. And so my experience in commercial, in the after the construction, is very much that AI would be, and is now starting to grow in this space, it is great for that kind of holistic analytics. So being able to do the trend analysis from just enormous amounts of data, which if you have to do it manually, it takes you 20 days to run a report. So you've got no hope of actually doing any trend or any other kind of concepts on top of that. But also things like contract reviews. If you think you're leasing a building and you have sub clauses and clauses and sub clauses and subleases and shared spaces and all the different things that come in with how you might lease a building, it's exactly the same. When you come to make a payment, is that payment justified and true? Have we used a human to hopefully catch the clause, or could we have used natural language processing to understand the context of the text and actually flag up to finance, this time period has passed and maybe you shouldn't be paying that. Those kinds of things which get missed, and they get missed because humans get tired on a Friday, they're still drunk on a Monday, and all those different things that don't happen to computers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Just going to say this is actually what you just described, Pete. You see that's a lot in investment space, right? Because a big element of deciding the value of a company is kind of referring to what customers they have, what type of contracts with the customers they have, and what are the terms of these. And when you have 1,000 different clients and every single one of them potentially on different terms, it's humanly impossible for someone to go through every single one of them, or it is very expensive. And so to be able to run all these documents and actually create a set of clauses and show which customer or which client is following what terms and what the payment information is, and what their rights to terminate the agreement are, and so on and so on, and actually have to have it all summarized. And at the end of it, that effectively each one of your 1,000 customers is on one of 3 types of contracts. That changes everything, right?
Yeah, agreed.
Thanks so much, guys. Yeah, it also sounds great, like so many applications, but we have a question on the myths around advanced AI and the limitations, right? Like, it's not going to solve all the problems. So maybe you want to say something, please?
So I think it's interesting, right? So in the slides earlier, we talked a bit about this, didn't we? The future of artificial intelligence and what it could, should, would mean for humanity. And what do we mean by that? What is the impact on the job market, for instance? Because we're all worried that robots can take our jobs. What happens if we build cool AI that becomes kind of self-aware and self-intelligent? Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And there are tons of examples, aren't there, of this kind of really boring pseudo controversy, and this is caused mostly by people who misunderstand or talking past or over each other. If we focus on interesting controversies and kind of open questions and not on misunderstandings, we can probably clean up some of those common myths. So we speak about that kind of emotionally intelligent AI, that kind of super intelligence, if you like. And everybody, I think Aldous Huxley did it in his book of, was it 1984, where, the world is going to be all autonomous and will be useless. Yeah, that didn't happen yet. And then you read stories of by 2100, the world will be taken over by robots. Is it inevitable? Is it possible, impossible? Frankly, I don't think we really know today. And that's why there is billions of dollars being pumped into this kind of area around the world. It's interesting though, because once you get going, like we see with lots of things, and the pandemic is a perfect example, you get this exponential explosion. And I think, and Kuba, you and I were talking about this yesterday, I think this is where, you know, helping people understand how AI can start to move. The pandemic has actually been a really great kind of understanding of if you just allow things to be uncontrolled, things can get bad very, very quickly. So, and we talk about, you know, if the Matrix, most people of an age have seen the Matrix, and you know, the humans covered the sky in that kind of permanent cloud stuff to limit the rate of AI growth, which kind of made a bit of sense, really. But because AI wanted to use solar energy and all that kind of stuff. But you know, the AI was so smart, it found a new source of energy, which was, you know, humans, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
What do you think, Kuba?
It's a little bit gruesome. Yeah.
I think. Go ahead. If you want to finish.
I was just going to say, I think really this comes down to, you know, is AI evil or is it full of hate? It isn't, is it? Because it's not conscious. It's programmed, and you know, can it become self-aware? Honestly, in my lifetime, I don't believe the answer is yes, and that's because even with neural networks and all these other things, they're still programmed, they're still learning, they still have limits to their capabilities, but they don't have, they're not sentient. Is sentient? Yeah, sentient is the word, isn't it? They're not. You know, a cat can make some choices because it's a cat, it's a living thing. But can it? You know, it will go and make the same mistake again and again because its attention span is very short, for instance. So I think this is more around the competence of AI. And when you ask AI to do a job and you ask it in a certain way, it will do it. It will find a way to do it the most efficient way. And that might be at odds with how you think, either, you know, how you feel emotionally about what it's about to do. And that doesn't make it evil or conscious. It just means that it's acting literally in the most efficient way, sort of thing. Sorry, Kuba.
Yeah. So no. It's great. You set me up for what I wanted to say.
Try to keep it under 1 minute.
So the way I think about it is what you alluded to is not about AI being evil. It's about it being super competent at what its goal is, or what its purpose is. And there is examples of that already, that the AIs that control the trading in an HFT environment, their purpose is X, but someone didn't think about, a scenario A and B, and those two different HFT AIs kind of got into a sort of deadlock, or like a dance, and market plunged. Like 2 years ago, that was in 2018, I think there was a big crash, like 800 points on Dow Jones or something like that. So I think, as with a lot of things that we've already discussed, there's like the features of those systems, they can be good or bad, right? In this case, the programmer is not realizing there might be some pattern on behavior. They didn't put a stop to that before, right? They didn't program any fail safes. But then when you think about it, that was the point of the AI, for it to find patterns that the people couldn't find, right? If they could find them, they would have done it in sort of in a traditional computer programming. And so this is what you want to harness, right? This one part of AI, that it can find patterns that humans wouldn't be able to find. And that's like the thing that I always think about in this area is this project that we've been doing with the law enforcement, where the AI analyzes the calls of the public to the police, and they find things in the sentences that this person says, and then goes and finds patterns that are related to those sentences in the databases that the police has access to. So this can be public data, but it's also data that's only accessible to the police. This is something that human operators do on a daily basis. The thing is that the human operators can't go through all of this data in the in the time span that's needed. And in this case of the police, this literally saves lives. It's not we're making a world a better place. It's reducing the response time in a terrorist event from 2 minutes to 10 seconds can mean lives. And I think that's one of the true powers of AI. I think we have some more questions, right, Camila?
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much, Kuba. You would like to talk, huh? So we have a question around financial services. So how can Mark asks, how can AI be used in detecting fraud? So obviously that's to you, Tom.
Oh, it's a brilliant one. There's a lot of it. I think we have to think about what type of fraud we're actually talking about, because mainly when people think fraud, they think sort of external fraud, but actually a big element of it is internal fraud as well. But the unifying sort of element between all of these is it could be finding patterns of behavior. And this is actually happening a lot already, and then we're getting very good at it. So there will be companies in the market that follow journeys of a customer through the website. And then they see a fraudster, and the fraudster sort of goes from website A to website D, let's say, and that's sort of technically not available on to a normal person. So you see that something's broken, or people click too fast, and so on and so on. And you can apply it to either external ecosystem or even to your internal things. There is a lot that can be done around finding differences in how people behave and how they've been operating until now and what they're doing or how their behavior is changing. And that is a very big one. And this is, again, how a lot of the systems sort of tend to work, which is finding sort of anomalies, right? So when you're suddenly starting to use your credit card in China at 3 a.m. in the morning, there is a good chance that it's not actually you. But there is also to be done in terms of documents and how documents are checked. So this is the example I mentioned earlier. So finding differences in the docs. It's about comparing information from different sources and making sure everything adds up, right? And I think sort of before we start the call, like I told you that I had an issue with accounting because we sort of submitted data or submitted the statement that was one day off versus what the local authorities had in their database, and this is triggering some alerts on their part. So a lot of these things can be triggered. Really, we're looking at sort of data extraction and how we collect the information and how we gather this. We're looking at potentially making this data a lot more usable, so cleaning of the data, only making sure that we keep the correct ones or the most needed ones. And then there is the whole process of analyzing this and comparing and trying to, as I say, find these patterns or anomalies or something that stands out, right? And then when you go through the sort of machine learning and the evaluation, you actually see you have these red flags, things that stand out.
Thanks so much, Tom. We have actually a question around more technical question. So that's to you, Kuba. So the person is asking, isn't NLP, natural language processing, simply a smart text mining? Like, what's the difference?
Right. So as with a lot of the terms that are around AI, those things get used in marketing materials, and they get kind of stretched and deformed, and at some point they kind of lose their meaning. The way I think about it, coming from technical background, text mining is like a low-level operations that we do on text. So statistics or the characters and words that are by itself in a business setting, probably not very useful. It can be useful when you doing some things like keyword searches, so just comparing two words, are they exactly the same? But text mining is crucial for NLP, which is, which builds on top of text mining. We use text mining techniques for the for analysis to derive this kind of higher order meeting. Can we do a kind of discussions with the attendees? I think this will be kind of more lively.
Sure, but I don't know if anyone is brave enough to speak up. Raise your hand if you do want to talk.
If not, we can carry on with the written submitted questions.
That's usually the case.
All right. But it's fine. We have the submitted questions, typed in questions.
That's fine. People can continue.
They are ending actually.
Well, of course, but people can continue to kind of send the questions in through chat if they don't want to speak up. But it might just be easier to just unmute the everybody on the call and just allow people to mute themselves, because it just allows people to jump in during the debate, I think.
Okay, I'm doing it right now. I don't know. Unmute all. And it didn't do anything.
No. Look at that technical problem.
I think this is...
Oh, Mark?
Yeah. Oh, no, we've got somebody who unmuted themselves.
No, I cannot hear anything.
You may need to drop down and unmute everybody manually and then allow people to mute themselves, Camilla.
I've done that. Let's carry on with the submitted questions.
I think you'll find Camilla's done it, guys. You're open
hello.
for business.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark.
Sorry, Cooper. Jump in. Go on. You were saying about you were talking about text mining and NLP. My bad.
Yeah.
No, I said let's carry on with more of the. I think this answers the question. I don't want to go into more technical details. This is not. I don't think this is a forum for that.
Okay. So we have like one of the very few questions which are left. So what value can AI bring to organizations? Are there any disadvantages? Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll jump in to start with. In my view, my experience, the things that I've done, I think AI can bring tons of added value to any organization. Most organizations are sitting on literally a pile of data. And we have best intentions to do things like to clean it up, to make money out of it, to store it differently, to analyze it, to look for patterns, identify problems, loads and loads of different things we aspire to do. And we often think, oh, we'll ship it out to the Eastern Europe, or we'll send it out to Asia and have it all processed there. And that's a 1980s view, isn't it, really? Today, we can take all that manual processing, that manual review. As we said earlier, computers don't get tired on a Friday afternoon. They're not looking forward to Saturday because they don't care what day it is. So it can very much automate any repetitive task. It's interesting because everyone always comes back to, well, if I take my low value, high volume work from my employees, what are my employees going to do? Well, actually, they're going to work on the edge cases. Actually, they're going to provide better customer service. Actually, they're going to turn their minds not to, oh shit, I've got to do this manual process again today, but to, it would be really cool if we could do this other thing. And when executives do this all the time, they set a direction for the business, and we all head off in that direction, and they close their ears. They've got a mindset which is, I'm the CEO, I'm the CDO, CIO, and I've done this myself as well. Don't forget, if you take a look at my LinkedIn profile, which many people have done already, I've been in those positions myself, and you find yourself going, yeah, probably I have more information than everybody else, and I know what I'm doing. But the people at the ground, they're working with the data, they're working with the systems, they know where the foibles are, they know what cool little tweaks would make something different, and often we ignore them. The AI system, of course, is very exact in what it does. Doesn't get bored, no fatigue. It can look at trends. It can look at trends backwards, but you know, because it has tons of data, it can analyze, and it has lots of reference and use cases. It can do predictive type analytics, which, you know, when we talk about intelligence, predictive analytics in itself is intelligent. So when people say to me, oh, that's just fancy analysis, it takes intelligence to do fancy analysis, and that's the thing I think. And you know, there is a disadvantage, of course, because you did say advantages and disadvantages, and that is we have to put our hands in our pockets at the beginning. We have to invest in a program in the journey to AI. And Cooper, when you described the slide, the end slide that we had, I can probably put it up if anyone wants to see it, of what is the journey. The value, or the not the value, the cost, the investment's a better word, is not just in doing that process automation piece at the first. It's kind of understanding the steps in the journey, and your you know, what could be a multi-year program of your advancement of AI. But I think you know, once you get the leadership on board to understand, you know, what value and what return that could offer, not in Q2 and Q3, but in years 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 and going, I think it's really interesting. I mean, Cooper, what do you think?
So the one caveat I would add here, on the disadvantage side,
Yeah,
not you know, to be completely honest, is that some of the systems, when you build a machine learning model, right, you model this thing in the real world that then spits out the suggestions or decisions, and you don't update it, it starts drifting, right? So you kind of have the view of your organization or the data from 6 months ago or 2 years ago, right? And suddenly the suggestions of the intelligence of the system kind of drifts off. So you have to build into those machine learning systems a way for the system to update itself. You know, what's the cadence of those updates depends on the use case of the, you know, of the project, but you have to do that, because otherwise it's, you know, it's very dangerous. Like,
but that's no difficult to any other technology, really, is it? I mean, if we think of, you know, basic infrastructure, you know, if you need more horsepower because you have more data, you buy more servers, or you know, your 10 servers that you had 5 years ago are now replaced by one single blade cabinet. So it's the same, isn't it? So your investment is not just one-off. It's a heavy upfront investment to get it moving, but then you have that kind of support, maintenance, and iteration as you go, which is the same as any other technology, really, isn't it?
True. I completely agree. Just sometimes, you know, people think this is this magic bullet. We want all the AIs and it will solve all our problems. And it just, you know, we can be in Hawaii sipping Mai Tais.
Cool.
Yeah. And I want to highlight this.
Wait.
Go ahead.
I just say that we just got a question, which I think is very interesting.
Yes.
We
Do
will
you want
pick it up.
read it? Oh,
Yeah, so the question is, it would be nice to hear what the speakers have to say regarding the role of the AI in the widening socioeconomic inequality that is plaguing across every sector. There is a danger that AI bias will drive another cause of concern. And I can actually take this one. So this is pretty much the topic of my master thesis. And I completely agree. I completely agree with you, and that every time we come to using any data or outcomes or anything that is based on the past, we're actually facing this, right? And I think you know, this is not a new problem. We already have it. It's already there. I've been arguing for a long time that credit risk models are deeply flawed and actually shouldn't be used the way they are. And there is a lot of good evidence for this. I guess what you're referring to, Anthony, is the challenge that when we become too reliant on AI, we may face more of these computer says no situations, because we lose the capability to sort of intervene and actually break the process. I guess from my perspective, it's not really about the technology. It's about how we use this technology and how we implement this. As I said, the problem is already there. The challenge already exists. Use of past data already impacts how we see the future, and it skews our perception. I actually see a little bit of hope in the AI by applying what Pete said earlier, right? If we actually get the AI to process the sort of the bulk of the information or the bulk of the applications and bulk of the cases, then we release a lot of people to be able to work on these edge cases. And this is how I would want this to be used and applied. Actually, by using AI, we can also get a better understanding of these edge cases because we can process potentially more information, and we can suddenly start correlating information that previously wouldn't seem relevant. So with technology like natural language processing, and being able to assign sentiment to certain things, we can now start correlating hard data with verbatim and with contextual information, which I think it's become very powerful. So I see the challenge you're referring to in a nutshell. I think the challenge or the risk isn't inherent to the technology. It's more dependent on how we implement this technology and how we actually decide to use it. I don't know if other guys have any other views.
I actually do have a couple of thoughts about this as well. And I think they're along your lines. So the first thing I always tell people about this bias topic is that, in a sense, AI, we are looking for bias, right? You want bias towards the correct result, right? If there was no bias in the AI system, it would be just a coin toss, right? So take for example the example of choosing candidates from their CVs, right? When they tried doing those systems, say CVs for a CEO role, right? And there is a lot of bias in the historical data towards white older men. So, but also there is in the end result, you want bias towards a better candidate, right? With more experience, more something, right? There is a bias, right? That you can't choose a random person that sends a CV to you and put them in a CEO position. So now the question becomes, how do we find the right bias or the right features of the data set and remove the wrong bias that we don't want there, right? So obviously you will find that there is a bias toward older white men because that's how the historical data looks like, and the AI just like learns it, right? The place where I have hope here is that AI can show us that, right? We put this is all about this finding patterns in the data, right? You have the historical data, you train the models, and you ask the AI to explain the decision. Why did you choose this candidate? And you see, all right, it's because this and this, and it's affected by those historical, entities. And then you start finding things that you might fix.
Of course, but the kind of the conversation goes on in text to say, but isn't that the issue itself? Humans are naturally biased in one form or another. Then we have those same humans who are programming the AI, and so the narrator here says that their thinking is that there should be strong policies put in place to regulate how data is used, and there is a strong feeling here that those policies need to be put in place. And I kind of understand that, right? Because it's true, we are all biased in one way or another, and often it's unconscious bias. And unconscious bias in programming is quite dangerous. If you specifically choose to program points of reference, which somebody can then go and read and go, oh yes, I can see that, that's fine. But if you have an unconscious bias where you can actually, you have the art of language and the art of programming, you can actually literally unconsciously bias the AI because you're unconsciously biased yourself.
It's a very strong one. So I think there's been, for instance, cases where new models for sort of credit risk have been tried to develop based on things like samples of writing. And the argument was that it's not your historic data. You can actually produce something, and this is how you will be assessed. However, very quickly it was dismissed because actually your sample of writing is in itself biased, because it's biased by your education, which again is biased by your social demographics, and so on, so on. It's a brilliant debate, and I don't know how I feel about policies around this and regulation, just because I can see policy and regulations in financial services that were meant to help people, and actually they aggravate a lot of the issues unintentionally. But I do recognize the whole issue around not training it. But again, as I say, it's almost not a new challenge that we're dealing with. It's potentially our opportunity, though, to get rid of the previous challenges we had, right? And maybe we should be thinking about this a lot.
And so AI is whilst it's technically based, it's also based on science, right? And one of the things that always makes me smile about the scientific community is they have proper peer review. So you write something, you have it reviewed by. So I would write something, a white paper, for instance, which we'll get onto in a minute, and I'll get you guys to have a look at it. We'll all agree that it's good for what we want. We will then send that out to a larger group of people to properly peer review before it gets published. And I would argue, Kuba, you're the deeply technical guy here in AI. I would argue that that's the kind of thing that AI is actually screaming out for, to kind of answer these bias type problems. Because if I can detect unconscious bias in the way something operates, or it's written, or indeed specific bias, then I can challenge you or whoever wrote it, and we can have that kind of debate. And it's not a policy per se, but it's a self-policing kind of peerage. Would that kind of thing work?
I think that sounds interesting, doesn't it? AI that would spot bias in AI.
Or even spot bias in people in real time, for example, right? You can have things that look at the conversations. And so I think, so what I meant before was that we can use AI to combat those problems just by the virtue of having an informed decision, right? Seeing in the data, here's what happens. We agree this is wrong or bad. And so then we can, we put in a policy, and we can see in 2 years, right, we improved the thing that we said was bad. But coming back to this, looking at the bias in real time, is that, I'm not sure, I lost my train of thought, but I think it's around the finding patterns in the data again, and the technology being so kind of, it doesn't have those biases. It's just precise, right? It can tell us, it can show us our biases.
Thanks so much, Kuba. Guys, I'm asking attendees, if you really want to ask something, just feel free to unmute yourself. Anthony says, thanks for the responses, much appreciated. Our text in the questions form, we are happy to answer questions, because we have the last one right now so far. The question says, give an example of where AI is used on a daily basis. Who wants to answer? No one wants to answer?
Hello.
Sorry, I was on mute. Oh, my bad.
I can take this one.
I missed the mute button. I can think of one perfectly that every single person on this call will have used probably a dozen times today already, and that's Google search engine. It's actually probably one of, if not the most popular AI application. Because when you open up your browser and start to type something, you'll notice you get this kind of drop down where it tries to provide recommendations for you to kind of search from. And in the back end, behind that search engine, behind the thing you see on the screen, AI is actually using its predictive analytics. It's using NLP, which we've talked about. It tries to understand the context of the thing that you're typing in. And then it's using machine learning to enhance its predictive analytics capability. So it's probably a really good example of the full gambit of AI at work, and yet we use it haphazardly every single day. And you know, it's search, history, location, age. It just uses AI to do tons and tons of things.
And it's very interesting because it's very interesting that you said, you know, most of the attendees and most of us, you know, use it a couple of days today probably. And it's people are used to this kind of interactions with computers, with information. And so there is no reason this kind of intelligence or this kind of systems cannot be implemented inside an organization. It feels almost, you know, there's like this outside world, and then there is the internal world of the companies. I actually have an example of another project that we've done that kind of touches on those subjects, and it's in a healthcare setting in a hospital. So we have this backend system that ingests a lot of data from the systems in that hospital, and believe it or not, they have 200 systems in which they store patient data, and that system will read the calendar of the clinician, and 5 minutes before their meeting, it will shoot the clinician a summary of the most relevant data of this patient that they have to know before the visit. And when you think about it, right? So, but what happens? What happened before they had something like that, right? And it's really, when you think about it, and this can only work like that, right? That those clinicians are not able to look at all of the available data. They kind of have heuristics or, you know, hunches of, all right, you know, this patient has this condition, they had this test before, therefore I need to look at those markers, right? So they kind of choose sample what they should be looking at. But so you probably would prefer your clinician to have like a complete overview of your health before they visit, rather than, you know, just a sliver of this information. It's, you know, it's an inherent kind of, you only have this kind of bandwidth in your head to like look at the data. And I think this is something that you, Tom, talked about in the due diligence process as well. Like this sampling approach to reviewing documents.
Okay, thanks so much, Kuba. Do you want to add anything, Tom, or no?
No, I completely agree with this.
Cool. We have another question from Alicia. Thank you. Will people who are becoming more privacy focused, taking measures to stop their data being collected, impact on the progress of AI? We don't hear you, Pete.
No, I would say absolutely not. So it's really interesting, isn't it? Because many of us, including me, are removing our digital footprint. Too late, folks. It's already there. I'll see if I can hold this up so everyone can see it. I walk around with a supercomputer in my pocket. It knows everything about me. It knows what I do, where I go, how long I'm there for. It probably listens into my conversations for all I know, even though I tell it not to. The only way to actually be private about your data these days, regardless of all the rules that we put in place, is to stay away from technology. It's to go and live on a desert island where, you know, the satellite can't find you. It really is like that. You know, like it or not, we hear about it all the time. And Kuba, we were talking about this literally before the call started, about data breaching, and the latest one being in healthcare, which is absolutely shocking. the basic fact is that AI will be able to find and search and scrape data from tons of places that are publicly accessible. If I think of, in fact, actually, Kuba, look at the work we've been doing on that police use case you were mentioning earlier, where we're actually scraping things like social media content because it's publicly available. You can go and get that. AI can analyze a photograph, and I saw a great video about this actually on YouTube the other day. And I think Barclays used it in an advert about a year ago, where they took a photograph of somebody outside their house, deduced their house number, the location of the photograph is in its metadata, and then the reflection on a table, you can get your credit card information, and then all of a sudden you've stolen somebody's identity. None of that information was actually generally available, and criminals are using AI tools to actually do that. So does it have an impact on the progress of AI? I think if enough people did it, the answer would be possibly, but in reality, nope, don't think so.
Yeah, I think
I know we've all got quite strong views on some of this.
It's definitely true that me being coming from a technical background, I kind of understand the extent to which some of those things can be used for, or like how they can be used, and I try to stay away from kind of more intrusive devices like Alexa or something like that kind of openly records your conversations. Will it? But this is the topic of the privacy. I think it's a separate one. The question is, does it impact the progress of AI? No, I would say what Peter's saying. Definitely not. Not like the data produced by people or about people. It's just a drop in the ocean of data produced by machines, right? You have sensors on the ship that log temperature and the heading and a million other things every second, right? You have so much data. It's not, the posts that you do online, it's just a drop in the ocean. It doesn't really affect anything, I think.
Thanks so much, Kuba. We have a comment from John on the area of bias. To my mind, there is a clear difference between bias and that which is based on the value systems, upbringing, cultural view, common wisdom. What methods are being seen to classify these to improve the intelligence from within AI? That's actually a question. Who wants to answer?
To be honest, I don't fully understand the question. The comment I have here about the common wisdom or the really like upbringing, so like this kind of the notion of having a hunch about something. I think this is again a kind of an uncommon view on AI, is that AI can help us see those things about ourselves, right? If we have enough data, you can see, oh, there's a pattern in my behavior, for example, that I didn't realize before that the AI can show you. And this conversation is mostly had in a negative sense, in the sense of this, some unconscious biases that are bad. But sometimes, like of course, there's good biases in our heads, right? That allows us to be successful. For example, we have a hunch, oh, this is a good investment, but you can't really explain it. But maybe AI can show you, oh, right, you always have this when this and this happens.
I think I would view it a bit differently. I think what John's trying to say here is that
maybe sorry Pete, but maybe John wants to expand on that. John, do you want to speak up?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, so this goes back to much earlier in the conversation when you were talking about the fact that machine learning can help you identify bias, and it identifies the trends and patterns from the data. But from my experience, it's not just about understanding the data. It's also about understanding the context of the data and when you actually capture the data. There are intrinsic rules about how that data was caught and about the timing. A good example of this is the Old Bailey analysis that was undertaken, where they looked at hanging back from the 16th century through the 14th century, 16th century, 17th century, showing the different propensity for judges to hang people, and also aligning that to interception points when they moved to hanging and moved away from hanging. So you have to look at it within that sort of concept. More recently, using National Health Service data from A&E, there was a clear indication that the propensity was to deal with children coming through with ailments rather than dealing with more severe cases. So common wisdom that was being perpetuated through time was you always deal with the children first. Reality was that A&E should set the criticality of the patient first. So what we have is, when we're looking at machine learning methods or analytic optimization methods, we need to look at A, concepts, but B, how do we differentiate between the bias, which is behavioral, cultural, sometimes religious, sometimes it's through the value systems that we have been taught, compared to the intrinsic data that we've got. And I just wondered what, I mean, people are using things like Q method to do some of that categorization, but I was asking the panel's opinion on where they felt and what they felt they were doing. Does that give a bit more roundedness to the conversation?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, thanks, John. I think it does. And it's interesting, actually, because Kuba, this actually is part of that debate of, you know, the autonomous car is going to crash. We can't stop it. Are we going to kill the child pedestrian or the old man pedestrian? It's exactly the same conversation, but obviously with a bit more kind of sensible context around it. It's and really the answer is that does genuinely depend on how you've chosen to program the parameters in the AI, doesn't it?
It goes back a little bit beyond that. It's the difference between sort of machine learning capabilities and actually putting in place the knowledge framework that sits around how you interpret those data points within the context and concept of the situation. A simple example is, guiding a drone into docking in a port, which has multiple environmental as well as safety critical risks to be assessed.
Yeah, so we're talking about subjectivity then, aren't we? Which subjectivity is quite an interesting thing, because this has psychological and social science kind of implications, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that you meant, you're talking about it's different if we gather this data in this setting or on that setting. But I think, in a sense, to the machine, it doesn't matter, right? So because the setting or the mood that the person was in, whatever you can think of, can be another data point, right? Another, like a feature in for example, in some table that we feed to the machine learning. The question then becomes, how do you know to do that, right? So the burden almost comes to the designer of the system, right? To know that this will affect the data in some fundamental sense.
Right. So it's a great one, and I absolutely love this question, because I think going back to where I started with the credit risk elements, we actually see a lot of this. Like credit risk as a system has been designed in a very specific environment, and it's just not used to handling certain cases. And sort of sometimes go, I just run a questionnaire to understand how people think and what they know about credit risk. And it was interesting to see that a lot of these things are actually very contextual, and as you just say, they go back to your cultural sort of background and where you were raised. So there are these common truths and common knowledge, right? And we all know that in order to improve your credit risk rating, you have to take a loan and then repay it and then show that you've been doing this, and that's how you show you're a good customer. But that is only true in sort of our market. You go to certain European countries and the model is actually the opposite. And the assumption is that if you've never asked for a loan and if you've never had previous debt before, that is what makes you a good customer. And there are a lot of people, and that became transparent in the survey, is a lot of people, Europeans, who then moved to the UK, and they kept on using the old sort of thinking patterns in this environment. And then you apply sort of scorecard to it, and it's not working. And they're actually achieving the opposite effects of what you would hope to achieve. And I think this is where we go to primary versus secondary feedback loops, right? And I actually have huge hope for AI over here, because rather than just being stuck in that secondary loop and going through data and saying, this is how we marked you, how did we perform against your credit risk, did you fail or not, and that's how you improve the system, you actually have an ability to go broader and say, what would the outcome have been if we had captured other data points, and if we actually if we take into account other things. It doesn't necessarily answer your question to how do we choose this and how do we manage this knowledge, right? And I'm afraid I don't really have a good answer to that.
It's a combination of exploitation and exploration of data, isn't it? It's kind of the intersection of context of state and action. So in terms of, I'll do a bit of diving into your world, Kuba. In terms of kind of programming, when I talk about exploring, this is what are all the different possibilities? What are all the different answers you can possibly come up with? That's exploring. And then the exploitation is to understand the context of the machine needs to understand the context to provide the right answer of the different things it's found it could do. And I think that kind of delves probably into your area of the world, right, Kuba?
Yeah, and now that you guys were talking about this, I think I understand the question more. How do you put in the cultural worldview or some implicit knowledge into the system, right? Because there are, like newborns, right? You have to. They don't know anything that is so obvious to us that you wouldn't even think about it. Yeah, that's a fantastic.
We lost you, Kuba. I cannot hear you. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, I lost
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
It muted by itself. Some AI.
You talk too much.
Does that answer your question, John? Or we completely missed the point?
No, what I was seeking is some of the additional methods that you might be doing for that. So for something that I think both Pete and Thomas hinted at, when you're looking at fraud and fraud analytics, then you need to look at not just what the data is telling you, but then you look for time series analysis type techniques that look at what's happening over time, but you're looking at co-resident patterns. So somebody trying to break into a UK bank is using this pattern of I start to build up my credit worthiness. I carry out transactions. It looks as though money is going in and transferring, but then that same pattern comes to an end when they get a loan, and 2 weeks later they've gone and the money has disappeared as well. That pattern is then being used in a Mexico bank, it's then being used in an American bank, it's being used in Turkey, and those patterns keep on moving. So it's more about what are the next level of methods that you're seeing that are starting to put the true insight on top of the machine learning. Does that help clarify further?
Yeah, I think so. So for me, this moves the discussion a little bit to like a different spot. And for us, at least for the project I'm involved in, this was always helped or even solved by connecting more data sources and being able to have a more holistic picture. Because the problems that you see a pattern somewhere and it appears somewhere else later on after you figure it out in this first place, you don't see it because you're not looking at another place. And in a lot of companies, this is what we are advocating, right? We help with one system and say, actually not say, we hope people see it that, this thing are we done over here can be applied to the other system as well. And then once you have more of those, there's an ability to connect all of them together. And that's, kind of ties back to what I was talking about at the beginning, is that then the whole is more than the sum of its parts. How do you guys think about it?
I think what I would just say is that, again, going back to that Minsky thing, where I wouldn't almost treat AI as the final solution to everything. And there are limits to what it can do. It cannot predict the future. There is still the challenge, to the example that John raised. How do you distinguish a genuine person building up their credit rating and wanting to take a loan from a fraudster, right? And if they actually are really good at imitating a person, then you will fall for it, and we cannot cut off everyone because it has to be managed. And what AI just allows us to do here is process a lot more information, and if we give access to a lot of the unstructured data, then we may just spot things that a person wouldn't look at, right? And just find that pattern that is sort of technically not possible to apply.
Yeah, this is the kind of the whole balancing act between kind of I talked about estimation before, or looking at different outcomes. So in John's example, if we were say to the AI, everybody who follows this pattern, you need to highlight to me. Well, we have unfair sampling in our estimation process at that point, because we predetermine the outcome. We've already given weight unfairly to that particular pattern. I think this comes down to the sample set that you have. I think that pattern was probably a little too simplistic, because that is what lots of people do. You can go into default, for instance. You don't necessarily run away with the money. But if your entire transactions with that institution cease 2 days after the money's been transferred to you and the money is transferred away, I think the process is a little longer than John described. Those extra 2 additional data points at the end give you a different view of your estimation process. And so I would say it's still unfair sampling, because you're now you're going to focus on the people who take the first 8 steps of 10, because why would you not do that? It makes sense. And it all comes down to bias being that disproportionate weight in favor of one idea or one thing, which kind of gives you a bit of a closed mindset or prejudice. And what we're just now talking about, or I'm talking about, is the fact that we're now going to prejudice the people that we've seen that pattern. So it is quite more complicated than just seeing a set of steps, because as you say, Tom, you know, fraudsters in all different guises will try and look as normal and as usual as possible right until the last moment. And I think the art of AI is to understand and predict what that last moment, you know, when that last moment is likely to occur.
I think the secret weapon here is humans, right? You use the AI to troll through all of this vast amount of data that you would never be able to look at, and then show this to a person at the bank, for example, and say, you know, this is something unusual. I'm not sure, you know, it's not suddenly this is a fraud, this is going to be bad, but you kind of flag things that are kind of pointing in some unusual direction.
Thanks so much, guys, and thanks so much, John. For those of you who just joined, please feel free to ask questions. You can use the raise hand option and just unmute yourself and ask questions whenever you want. And I have another question. There has been a lot of hype around AI recently, but we know it's been around for some 7 decades already. What has changed now? Tom, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can take this one. Let me think. So there are two, I think, big changes. We have more information than ever before, so we can rely on more data sources. And I think it sort of goes back to the example that sort of Kuba Alpit used, that we suddenly have all these photos available, right, in the world. And then you all keep on hearing these statistics that there's sort of more videos, you know, uploaded to the internet last year than was sort of size of internet in previous decade, whatever, you know, like all these sort of exponential growth information. So that gives us just a lot of data to work with. And then the second thing, we have a lot more of the computational power to actually process it. So we have computers that can go through the data and take out information. And then I think the last element that we have there, we've built a lot of these simpler sort of auxiliary tools around it that help us with the way we use AI. So we're, for instance, a lot better at understanding and processing language, right? And there are things like, you know, everything that's Untrite is about the natural language processing. You know, we're now getting into this space where we have the Babylon, sorry, not Babylon, Babel, trying to sort of do live translations of language. It's insane. And once you have this, you can do a lot more than we could do in the past. So hopefully now we will be able to do due diligence automatically, and, you know, just take humans completely out of it. No one will ever have to read through 1,000 documents again. We just plug it into the system and process.
You know, Tom, I knew you were going to find a way to weave due diligence in there somewhere.
Obviously, it's all about due diligence piece, which is actually very interesting. So there is a brilliant quote that's in sort of one of the papers I read the other day from Professor Stephen Brown, who talked about the efficient market theory. And everyone kind of talks about efficient markets as saying that the sort of security prices reflect all available information, right? But we actually always forget that there's the second bit to it, which says that, you know, nothing ever said that all this information is actually correct and processed correctly. And the big challenge with doing due diligence or doing any analysis or investments or making decisions, it's not even access to information. It's how do you verify it's correct? And then how do you make sure that, you know, going back to the discussion we've been having the past few moments, how do you make sure you actually don't add a lot of bias on top of it? And how do you make sure that you process it correctly? and I have a brilliant example. I worked with a company where they tested AI decisions for giving loans to businesses. And that AI was actually a lot better at making decisions than the underwriters. And that's already a few years back, right? So combine the access to new information and combine the ability to remove some of these sort of skews that we naturally have and biases, and I think becomes very powerful. And this is the difference between AI that we saw, whenever you said in 70s, 60s.
Thanks.
It's interesting because the explosion of technology. I mean, just to reminisce for a moment, when I was a teenager, there was no such thing as a mobile phone unless you were in the military, and it was a satellite phone. And the explosion just in the last 25 years of going from that thing that could barely make a phone call to, as I said earlier, supercomputer in the pocket. I think AI is kind of just literally sat on the back of that wave. We are more connected than ever before in lots and lots of different ways. I mean, can any of us imagine 15 years ago having a pandemic and then having to do this meeting where typically we would have a conference in a hall somewhere, and now we can't do it. So AI is just on that same trajectory in my mind, and it's interesting. I mean, my surname is Moore, and there is a law called Moore's law, which is always makes me smile in technology, which essentially says that processing power will reduce in size by half roughly every 18 months and double in power. And so far in the history of computers, that's roughly been about right. And at the same time, AI is making that same step forwards. Every 12 to 18 months, you're hearing of something cool and new that's coming out of AI. And it's purely because access to all of this interconnected data and the ability to process it at such great speeds is actually possible today.
Cool. Thanks so much, Pete. Kuba, do you want to add anything? Or?
I think it's a very good point about AI riding back on a wave of some other technology. So Pete mentioned mobile phones. I think AI makes every other technology better in some sense, either by the ability to design better things in that technology, or analyzing the data that comes from that technology broadly, right? And so an example that comes to mind is from actually a previous webinar that we had about 5G. There's a lot of AI that's used for 5G and on 5G, right? You have AIs that have to design, you have to use AIs to design the placement of the towers, because the 5G waves are absorbed by a lot of things like trees, right? They can't go through trees. So you have to have much more of the stations, they're much smaller and much less power, much lower power, but you have to have more of them. And they have to communicate with each other to then, transfer the data back to the data centers. So they use AIs to optimize the placement. But then you have AI on the other side of analyzing the data that comes from the usage of the network, for example.
Yeah, are you thinking about the conversation we had where we were talking about the use of AI, edge, and 5G?
Yeah, exactly.
What I found interesting in that is, I went into that with so what about 5G? And actually, we came away having debated that for a couple of hours over drinks, which is always good. That actually 5G does things, doesn't it? Because we're taking compute power much closer to the sensor, first of all, with edge technology, which is a data center in the cloud. So it's just located somewhere different. But anyway, whatever, it's getting faster and smarter and closer to the edge, to the device. But also those devices now are able to move data. Individually, they can move data really fast anyway. But now we have the connectivity to do it. And particularly where Wi-Fi doesn't work, and I can't say what the use case was, but there was that particular use case, or that location case, and we then kind of sprouted from there, didn't we? Around let's look at transportation, and because of transportation, let's look at the type of goods. If it's fresh fruit and flowers, then let's look at Google Maps and Waze to do rerouting. Let's look at what the emergency service is doing, and the use case just exploded over the course of a couple of drinks. So the way that that AI has allowed us to imagine those things quickly, but also actually proof of concept them equally as quickly is fabulous.
Thanks so much, Pete. I'm just conscious of our time. We have only 12 minutes, and I know some other people want to ask some questions. We have a new one. Yuzi is asking most topics around AI so far. Is your company specializing in AI? How your business utilizing the AI is utilizing the AI tech? Yuzi, do you want to expand on that, or do you guys know?
I think it's pretty simple. Yes, we're specializing in AI, and how we're utilizing AI, we mostly specialize in NLP, so natural language processing, being able to do intelligent things with documents to help people, have more time to focus on more creative things, showing them information that they need at the right time, and so on.
Cool.
So all the use cases that we've mentioned, I think I don't want to repeat all of this.
Yuzi, is something in particular you want to know? Are you interested in any kind of use case? Have you seen something and you would like to discuss? Maybe I have to unmute you.
Hello,
Oh, yeah.
hi, it's Yuzi here. Yeah, thank you for the answer. Now I'm just curious about your business and the company, and what specific AI and technology. I know it's in different industry has different needs, and also the the technology and skills are different. So that's why in my business is more to do with procurement, because we currently have as I think Camilla, we are working on the data processing this part. So that's why I thought ask, because the topic sounds really interesting, and the AI intelligence. So in terms of reading the document and help managers to process the data. So I'm just thinking perhaps that sort of thing we could explore, but yeah.
I think
Can I
procurement,
just
It's a general topic, yeah.
Yeah, procurement's one of those interesting cases, isn't it? Because Cooper, you started the almost 2 hours ago now. Geez, that time disappeared. You started with the use case really, where we went from that use case into medical, into police, into several other areas. And actually what we're talking about, and you did say this at some point today, it's the same sets of technologies, it's the same back-end modules that we use, but they're configured differently depending on the data set that we're looking at. And in terms of procurement's actually a really interesting space, because procurement people find very minor nuance in contracts for suppliers. And the reason I definitely know that is procurement are one of the people that always protect me, always. So I want to go and sign up with this company. I want to do it tomorrow. I want to spend $1 million. And it's always the procurement person that goes, yeah, okay, let's have a look at that. Hey, did you know that if this thing goes wrong, this is what they're going to do to you? And I was like, no, of course not. I didn't read that, because as a human being, why on earth would I read that? I just want my cool stuff, and I'm willing to pay money for it. So it's I think the one downside I find with the procurement process in every company I've been to so far, though, is it's time consuming, and it's only when you sit alongside somebody and say, so Mr. Procurement Person, what the hell do you do? And you see them literally properly analyze these documents and compare them against, you've got to get your 3 quotes, and it's not just about price, it's about nuance of contract. And so you can see why it takes several rounds of, conversations backwards and forwards with suppliers, backwards and forwards with legal, and all these kinds of things. And I think AI can just absolutely smash that time frame down to something really minimal. If If I have to wait 3 weeks for procurement, which is quite typical, then that's actually relatively quick. I'd really like it to be 3 days, and we can't really do that, but just by asking people to read tons of documents. So I think there is definitely a use case there using.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think just to add to it in more broader sense, we're going back to what Cuba said, that the AI is pretty much like this child. So when child is born, it has capabilities to learn pretty much anything, and it just needs pushing in the right direction and giving a little bit of sort of encouragement and education. And this is the same thing. So the core engine is there, and then how and where we apply it, just a matter of feeding it the right information, the right data, and giving it sort of the right environment to learn all these skills.
No, I think, yeah, thanks. Thanks, Thomas. In my view about AI is more because in my industry, in my company, it feels we need that. However, to get that position, because it's a long way. We are not saying we're not going to use it. That is definitely way forward. We have to, and if we can lift some of the pressure, manual process, in the workload, is definitely. I'm sure the procurement, head of procurement is all looking into that direction. But when we are in the position to get there, don't know how long it would take, because especially to train, so to get into utilize AI, we will have to give order. In order to get that order, to code, to written up the code, and to give that order, we have to know what kind of what we're looking for, what are we actually want. Sometimes we don't really know, because AI world is still quite fairly new, although we are using like Hi Siri, Google's and all those things. See, as my phone pick up my Hi Siri now, and but in the work environment, we still got a long way, but it's all interesting. I think it is worth exploring that. Yeah.
Thanks, Susie.
That's very informative, Yuzi, actually. I think, and I feel a lot of people feel that like that, right? Feel that the process is thanks, Steve. Feel the process is there is between where you are right now and where you want to be. Like you can't imagine how to get there, and that's why we've opened with there is a process. There is a process you can take, and each step brings you some value. Each step is self-contained and understandable, and through setting those little stepping stones, you can get to a kind of more holistic AI place. So like I mentioned at the beginning, the first step is taking the things that you already do, that people already do, and basically codifying them and automating them, and then gathering data around those processes to then expand. And if you do that for a couple of processes, you can then have those synergies between them in the AI engine and have even more benefits. I think Pete will know how to say it better.
Yeah, so one of the things I say to clients when I go see them, or at companies as I work in them, is if you can write down in a picture and describe what it is that you do, I can get somebody to program it. I can't program it myself, of course, but I know that Cuba can. And this is this robotic process automation. It is taking the manual stuff that we do day in, day out in a very prescribed manner, and actually asking the computer to do it. Only because the computer will do it accurately and fast. And that's where we always start. The rebuke to that is always, oh, you're trying to take my job. That's not true. What we're actually looking for is for the human intelligent part to do the more intelligent piece of the work, which is when the computer says, not really sure about this, this is an edge case, give that to the human being. Let them understand it. Let them refine the process. Let them teach the machine. And then, work for us as human beings becomes actually more rewarding, even if it's in a mundane field or whatever. If we can take that kind of manual processing steps away, we're doing well. And the journey that you said right at the beginning, in fact, it's up on the screen, on my screen over here. The beauty of the machine learning element is that, when you get to use natural language processing, and I really liked your description earlier, Kuba, about it not being just standard text scraping, that was brilliant, is the machine starts to understand nuance. And so in the case of a contract, and you've got some, random clause, the computer can go, oh, hey, I kind of understand what that means. It means that this condition will apply. And it's at that point you through you as a human being understanding the edge case, giving the computer a point to reference for it to then use NLP to refer back to how to make a new, better decision next time around. That's where we should be kind of heading to.
Thanks
Is
so
that
much,
what you're
Pete.
looking for?
No more speaking on that. We
Okay.
have just 1 minute left, so we should just see if there is anybody who wants to just add or ask another question. Otherwise, we should wrap up. Anyone wants to raise a hand?
I've got 2 more hours free, so I can stay on. I'm good.
No, I think we are all a bit tired. Okay, then we have no more questions. So then, Tom, do you want to just jump in and say a bit more on the white paper we're going to share?
Yeah, of course. So as we mentioned a few times, Camilla and I actually explored some of these topics that we discuss here in our white paper recently. So I think this is going to go out to participants. So if you're interested in pretty much reading a little bit of what we discussed today and maybe diving more into that specific application, that is probably the right call.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, guys. And thank you so much to everyone who attended. And this has been recorded, so I'll be sharing the recording with you for you to watch at a later stage. Thanks.
Thank you,
guys.
folks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks
Bye.
all.